The peaceful beauty of Norfolk Island, a fertile paradise in the South Pacific, 1,600 kilometres east of Brisbane. Tourists come from all over the world for its spectacular scenery and its unique history, as well as to experience the isolation and the tranquility. This is a relaxed and friendly place where people give each other a helping hand and doors and windows are left unlocked. But on Easter Sunday 2002, a terrible crime will haunt the island for 5 long years.
10:46 p.m. on Sunday the 31st of March.
Like I said before, it doesn't happen on Norfolk, this sort of thing.
The court was told that an autopsy revealed Janelle Patton's death was due to multiple injuries.
We've lost a good friend, a good girl of the island. Let's find the person.
16 people were named at this week's inquest as being of interest to the police investigation.
The volcanic outcrop of Norfolk Island is discovered by Captain James Cook on his second Pacific voyage on the Resolution in 1774. Covering only 40 square kilometres, its first use was as a jail for the most irredeemable convicts from the Australian colony. After the jail is closed, the island becomes home to the descendants of a much more notorious group of criminals, the mutineers, who staged the revolt against Captain William Bligh on HMS Bounty in the South Pacific in 1789. Today, there are more than 2,000 Norfolk Islanders forming a close-knit community and a complex web of families and interrelations. The island is now administered as a self-governing territory of Australia, but still has its own laws, including strict customs and immigration regulations. Janelle Louise Patton is born in Sydney in 1972. Her arrival causes particular excitement in the family, as she is not only Ron and Carol Patton's first child, but the first grandchild on either side of the family. Janelle has a normal and mostly uneventful childhood and grows into a pretty brunette with a wide circle of friends.
She still was very family orientated. She was very loyal to her friends. She was very caring sort of a person. If she saw somebody in trouble, or she'd try and, march in and help somebody, and she was very forthright in her opinions, very determined, I guess, is one way of putting it, and bossy, all sorts of things, just a real mixture.
By the time she's in her 20s, she's had some turbulent relationships, but can't seem to settle into anything permanent. In 1999, at the age of 27, she decides that Norfolk Island is the perfect place to get away from the unhappy routine of her life.
The time she went to Norfolk, I think she was looking for something. She was unhappy here. She was in a bit of a rut with her jobs, and she had broken a very close relationship which had broken up.
Janelle takes a job at one of Norfolk's many holiday resorts and quickly adapts to the relaxed pace of island life, making new friends and having several love affairs. She's been working on the island for 2.5 years when Ron and Carol decide to visit her at Easter 2002. For weeks beforehand, Janelle repeatedly tells her friends how much she's looking forward to showing her parents around her new home. They arrive on March 30th, Easter Saturday.
And she met us at the airport, but it was a rush. Everything was a rush. It always was with Janelle. And I remember, I'm looking around saying, oh, this is nice. Come on, Mum, come, haven't got time, open the boot, threw the luggage in.
When we arrived at Norfolk, I commented, Carol, at the time just how healthy and vibrant Janelle was. We then were given a grand tour of the island with a commentary of Janelle telling us all the finer points about it.
She pointed out various places. Of course, we just bought a new camera and I'm saying, oh, we need to take photos. Oh, Mum, you've got plenty of time to take photos. We've got to hurry, you know, rush, rush, rush.
That evening, they dine at the Castaway Hotel, where Janelle manages the dining room.
Walked through the door, she sort of clapped her hands. Everybody, stop, stop, stop. You know, these are my parents, this is my mum, this is my dad. And of course, everybody clapped and said hello. And
As Janelle has to work next morning on the breakfast shift, they agree to meet her for lunch. Easter Sunday morning is hot and muggy as Janelle completes her breakfast shift at the hotel.
She was just so keen to get out of there, you know, get home and go for her walk, and then they were meeting somewhere for lunch. But she was skipping around the kitchen and singing as she usually, but this was extra, like, you know, and, oh, come on, Paul, let's hurry up and get all the kitchen organised, let's get out of here.
She finishes work at about 11 o'clock and drops by the island's main supermarket to do some quick shopping. The video surveillance camera shows her in the store at 11:16 a.m. On her way out, she briefly bumps into her landlady, Ruth McCoy, before heading home to her small flat behind McCoy's house in Allendale Drive. About 11:30, Ruth is returning home and sees her young tenant striding out on her regular morning walk.
Janelle was stepping around the post. She was on the passenger side. And we just sort of waved and that was it. She was gone, we were gone round the corner. Thought no more of it.
Her walk takes her down to Rooty Hill Road and on towards the famed Queen Elizabeth Lookout. A number of locals see Janelle walking along and, like all passers-by on Norfolk, they smile and wave. At 11:40 a.m, she's passed by a young mother, Jodie Williams, who's out driving around trying to settle her young baby. When Jodie drives back along the road about 10 minutes later, there's no sign of Janelle. At the nearby Norfolk Island Golf Club, Arthur Keeping hears a scream. But by the time he goes outside to investigate, it has stopped, and he can't tell where it came from.
we'd been out in the morning and then we got back to where we were, had some lunch, and 1 o'clock came and...
Weren't so much worried about 1, but by 2 o'clock, where's Janelle?
They decide to go off to nearby Emily Bay for a swim. And they return to their hotel and then drive to Janelle's flat.
And then one of her friends, Katie, came and called out, and we said to her, "Have you seen Janelle?" She said, "Oh, not since this morning."
The friend, Katie Nobbs, drives off to see if she can find Janelle, but can see no sign of her. Ron and Carol then join the search. It's getting dark when they return to Janelle's flat, and they meet up with the flat's landlords, Foxy and Ruth McCoy, who confirmed that Janelle went walking at 11 that morning.
That was the last that they had seen of her, so this made us a little bit concerned. So we decided to ring the police, and the fellow asked us to come down the station.
And I don't know now, but I think at that stage I just thought it would be to report, you know, to fill out a report form or something like that. We went to the police station and that's where it all unfolded from there.
On the Easter weekend in March 2002, Sydney couple Ron and Carol Patton are visiting their 29-year-old daughter Janelle, who's working on remote Norfolk Island. After a happy reunion on Saturday, Janelle mysteriously fails to meet them as arranged for Sunday lunch. As darkness falls, they call the police and are told to come to the station. The police need to see Ron and Carol face to face because the badly battered body of a young woman has just been found on the other side of the island. At about 6:15, 2 New Zealand tourists had been walking at the Cockpit Waterfall Reserve when they'd come across the body, partly covered in black plastic sheeting.
And when we got to the station, I saw this fellow standing. Like most people were sitting down there. There was a fellow standing, but he wasn't a policeman. He was a doctor with a stethoscope on. And that sent alarm bells as far as I was concerned.
The Pattons tell the police constable on duty the facts about their missing daughter.
He said, I have to tell you, he said, a young body of a young woman has been recently found, and he said, before we talk anymore, we must decide, ascertain whether it's your daughter or not.
To spare the Pattons the horror of possibly identifying their daughter's body, Ruth McCoy volunteers to go to the reserve. It's after 9 p.m. when Ruth sees the partially covered body and immediately knows it's Janelle.
And it was, you could tell it was her shoe. I'm sure it was her shoe, you know. And then it was only her face that was showing, her left side of her face, which wasn't, to me, wasn't damaged at all. Her hair was over the top of her head.
I believe we're in a state of shock. I believe we floated. Yeah, you're going through the motions, and we're very supportive of the help that we were given.
I sort of vaguely remember thinking, oh, she's been hit by a car. Like, what else would happen to somebody? There's been an accident of some sort. And I'm maybe not hit by a car, but certainly an accident. And I said, oh, what happened? And somebody, I guess it was Brendan, but I don't really know, said, oh, it looks like she's been assaulted and stabbed.
The murder makes news headlines around the world. The peaceful Norfolk Islanders are stunned by such a terrible crime occurring in their midst.
Yeah, it made everyone feel a bit uneasy because, well, I felt like that because maybe he was after young people or maybe someone who was associated with her. You just don't know what's going through a person who could do that. It's mine.
We have a number of widowed ladies and single ladies living on the island, and some of them, these widowed ladies, some of them were very much afeared for their own safety.
The Federal Police in Canberra are alerted, and they assign one of their most experienced investigators, Detective Sergeant Bob Peters, to the case. This is the first murder in more than 100 years, and many locals are convinced that the killer has to be an outsider. They assume there'll soon be news of an arrest, since there are only about 500 temporary visitors and tourists on the island that weekend.
And I went with my workmate at the time, Tony Edmondson, and there we stayed, more or less. We were originally there to help them out for about 10 days, and I think there was a bit of an expectation that the matter was going to be solved quickly.
Norfolk Island is very strictly immigration controlled, so within a very short time we had a list of everyone who was on the island that day. Extrapolating from that, the name of the murderer must have been on that list.
The investigation is given the title Operation Dunedin, and its first priority is to perform an autopsy.
There's an anklet, gold in colour.
There are a lot of superficial cuts about a face and about the front of the neck.
There was some on the right shoulder as well, and those injuries were caused by a sharp object like a knife or a broken piece of bottle, with an assailant coming up very close and cutting the skin.
The knife wounds include a deep slash across her face and a stab wound in her eye that fractured her skull.
She had several lacerations or injuries where the skin tears about the head region, and we found fragments of glass in her hair. And I think that those injuries came about by being struck with an object, a blunt object such as a bottle or a vase or something like that.
As well as the glass fragments, some flecks of white and green paint are found on her body. The injuries extend from her head to her feet, and she has a number of broken bones, including a dislocated ankle and a fractured pelvis.
Then there were other injuries. There were grazes on her back region. There were bruises in many areas of the body. There were round grip marks on an arm near the wrist, making me think that at some stage during this assault somebody had grabbed her wrist and tried to restrain her.
Although Janelle's clothes had been neatly cut away from her body, there was no evidence that she'd been raped.
There were cuts to her lower legs, just above the ankle region, made with a sharp weapon like a knife again. There were multiple abrasions on the knees. There were other bruises to the sides of the body, and there were other marks to her back, a combination of abrasions and bruises that had a somewhat distinctive appearance and made me think that possibly a rod or something like a tire lever might have been used to inflict some of those injuries.
The wounds clearly indicate a savage and sustained attack lasting up to 10 minutes, during which time she fought back fiercely. For this reason, Dr. Carla suspects that only one attacker was involved, because two or more would be expected to have overpowered her sooner.
No! 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 Help me! No! No!
The fatal wound, of course, ignoring all these other injuries, was a stab wound to the left side of the chest, which entered the left lung and exited, and in fact struck the left side of the chest cage.
6 days after the murder, a memorial service is held.
The church was full to overflowing. And it's manifested itself, I should say, in so many ways like that, where when something happens in the community, it just clicks together like a well-oiled machine.
Australian Federal Police detectives have been sent to Norfolk Island to help with the investigation into the murder of 29-year-old Janelle Patton. The early days of the investigation are taken up with tracking Janelle's last hours alive, examining the area where her body was found, and establishing the approximate time that she was left there.
That afternoon there'd been a really heavy rainstorm, around 3:30, 3:45. It was not uncommon on Norfolk, but this one was torrential. It lasted 15 minutes, but the amount of water that fell was phenomenal.
When Senior Constable Julius first arrived at the scene, he noticed that there were pools of water on the plastic, in areas of the plastic, which suggested that the body had been placed there before the rain.
In mid-afternoon, some local surfers take advantage of the wet, grassy slopes to ride their boogie boards.
They brought the video camera in and the videotape in, and we hooked it up and I watched it, and you could see the body of Janelle in the corner of a few of the frames. So that, again, that was date and time stamped, so that gave us a time that the body was there.
Detective Bob Peters believes the killer's choice of both time and place for abandoning the body are highly significant.
Possibly that a partner was coming home from wherever, or people were due around to visit, so they had to take the risk of moving it in daylight rather than night time. And night time in Norfolk Island is a particularly dark situation and a lot less likely to be caught.
The torrential rain has washed the site clean, possibly removing blood, footprints or other evidence. The plastic is sent to Australia, where police find 10 smudged partial fingerprints. Because there were only slightly more than 2,700 people on the island that day, police ask all islanders to volunteer to be fingerprinted and submit DNA. About 1,300 agree.
I'm pretty sure that the response we got on Norfolk Island would outstrip any kind of response we would get in a city on the mainland, for example.
The mass fingerprinting is a huge undertaking, requiring a team of specialised operators from Canberra to be flown to the island. To quickly locate possible witnesses and even establish alibis, everyone is asked to complete an initial written survey, listing their movements on Easter Sunday.
So that again gave us ways of linking people to places and timings and different areas, and putting people with other people at particular times as well.
The police begin retracing Janelle's activities on the Sunday morning and identifying anyone who might have seen her. They delve into Janelle's life on the island and interview all her friends and her former lovers. They must also look into the apparent coincidence of Janelle being murdered about 24 hours after her parents arrived on the island. While Ron and Carol are quickly eliminated, Peters compiles a lengthy list of people who'd had some contact with Janelle. Peters begins to get the first inkling of the distinctive nature of Norfolk Island society and how difficult this investigation is going to be.
I don't think anyone from outside could give you a good assessment of what Norfolk Island's really about after a couple of years, even after a number of years. It's a fairly unique sort of a place. In some regards, it's a little bit like a small rural community, but they're surrounded by ocean with no road going in or out.
The islanders are helpful and cooperative with the police, but like all small communities, for all the outward kindness and sociability, Norfolk has its simmering rivalries, petty feuds and jealousies. There are some accusations that some locals are using the investigation as a chance to settle old scores, but police dismiss such claims. During the next 2 years, Peters conducts thousands of hours of painstaking investigation. He gradually comes to focus on 16 persons of interest, people he believes could have had a motive. Some, like Ron and Carol, are quickly cleared, but others, including a number of Janelle's friends and former lovers, require closer examination. Eventually, Peters reaches the point where there is nothing new to add to the investigation. He's convinced that someone on the island must be hiding the killer's identity.
And this was an attack that happened in broad daylight, in a place where if you snooze at 2:30 in the morning, people quite often tell you that you need some medication when they see you at 8 o'clock in the morning.
The case is sent to the ACT and Norfolk Island Chief Magistrate Ron Carl. Exactly 2 years after the murder, the coronial inquest opens in the Norfolk Courthouse at the Colonial Military Barracks. There is distress for Janelle's family and friends when every detail of her love life is bared in open court.
We had to put up with negatives. I think they were blown out of all proportion. I think if you were to look at people of her age group at that time and their behaviour and what they were doing, it wasn't that much different from what her age group was doing.
The inquest reaches a climax when the coroner uses a rare tactic trying to break the case open. He releases Detective Sergeant Peters' report, which names 10 persons of interest.
But it's certainly caused a lot of heartache and a lot of finger pointing and major problems for the island as everyone was looking over their shoulders and pointing fingers at each other.
Not only do the police not have the usual single suspect on whom they can concentrate and gather evidence, Peters is forced to admit that there's a wide range of possible motives. But one thing is clear: nothing in her relationships with each of the persons of interest can remotely explain the ferocity and passion of the attack on Janelle.
From a clinical point of view, the disputes that she'd had with people, I couldn't see as being sufficient that would trip somebody over the edge.
After 4 days reviewing the evidence, Coroner Ron Carl handed down an open finding.
So I don't regard the matter of not uncovering the perpetrator as a failure, but just a step in a long and hard process.
To try to flush out new information, a $300,000 reward is offered. But the naming of the persons of interest will produce nothing, and the islanders will demand an apology because when the killer is finally caught, he is not one of the named persons, and yet he has been interviewed by police. And his fingerprints are sitting in a file, waiting to be uncovered and linked to the murder. The investigation into Janelle Patton's murder has lasted 2 years, and police are still no closer to finding the killer. The coronial inquest has released the names of key people who've been investigated, but there's no firm evidence to link any of them to the killing. The breakthrough comes soon after the inquest is completed, when police decide to conduct a thorough review of all the evidence. Among the files is a set of fingerprints from a New Zealander, Glenn McNeil, who was working on the island as a chef at the time of the murder. His prints had been taken when he was interviewed about a minor break-and-enter case. During the interview, McNeil was also questioned about his whereabouts on Easter Sunday. He gave police an alibi for the time of Janelle's murder, and 10 days after that interview, he left the island. About a year later, Bob Peters came across the fingerprints, still sitting in the break-and-enter file, and he sent them to Canberra for testing. At first, they did not match the prints on the black plastic sheeting.
It was originally considered to be another part of his hand, so the comparison didn't match up. And then they looked at the fingerprints again and realised that what they thought was one part of a finger turned out to be another part of a finger. And then they identified it as Mr. McNeil's.
Peters is wary. He knows there could be many reasons for people to have touched the plastic before the murder.
I'd been on the roller coaster so many times that I refused to get myself too excited. I thought, well, okay, so he's touched the plastic. Let's see where it takes us from there.
In his interview about the break-and-enter, McNeil had told police he was at home on Sunday. He claimed to have had a number of phone calls with his wife, who was at work. His wife had confirmed she'd made the call and that he'd driven to the hotel to bring her a cut lunch.
I then got access to his, by warrant, to his old telephone records and established that there was no such phone call from the hotel to their house that day, which cast considerable doubt on her alibi for him.
The police then discovered that McNeil's marriage had broken up soon after the murder. They also found that he'd owned a white four-door Honda car. Now, this was significant because several witnesses had reported seeing similar cars around the Rooty Hill Road area at the time of the murder. A search is started and a public appeal issued. And in December 2004, the car is finally found abandoned on private land, not far from McNeil's former home.
We executed the search warrants on that car, on Mr McNeil's old flat and the grounds of his old flat. We also executed a search warrant on the house next door, which had been a building site at the time, all for the purpose of forensic examinations.
The car is taken to a secure, sealed shed where it won't be contaminated. In stifling summer heat, a team of investigators conducts a microscopic examination over 3 days, taking the car apart piece by piece.
Their diligence remained as high as I had to get to the stage where I had to say, time to take a break. You're going to kill yourself if you keep this up. I think they went through about 3 different vacuum cleaners, burnt the motors out of them, just because of the humidity.
The examination produces some human DNA, along with some hairs, some fragments of glass, and flecks of white and green paint. Matching glass fragments are found outside McNeil's former home, while the white paint flecks match those on Janelle's body. Some of the hair isn't suitable for normal nuclear DNA testing, and it has to be sent to the United States for a more complex process called mitochondrial DNA testing. This traces an individual's maternal lineage, so the hair is sent along with DNA samples taken from Janelle's mother, Carol. Amazingly, Bob Peters has to wait a frustrating 12 months to get the results.
We had to fly those hairs over to America by safe hand courier. They were lodged with the DNA experts or the laboratory over there with the promised timeline that kept on getting extended, and to the end where we said, well, we found another suitably qualified laboratory. We had to get somebody to fly over and get the hairs from the first laboratory and take them to the second laboratory and then wait for their process again.
In the meantime, Glenn McNeil is located in New Zealand and put under surveillance. Since leaving Norfolk, he's formed a de facto marriage and fathered 2 children. When the test results finally come back, they show the paint samples match those found on Janelle's body, and the glass fragments are declared by several experts to match the glass found in Janelle's hair. Most important of all, the hairs match Janelle's family DNA. To prove that it is definitely Janelle's DNA in the car, the detective must establish that her mother, uncle, and brother Mark have never been near the vehicle.
I've got statements from each of those 3 people to say they'd never been in that white Honda, and particularly never been in the boot of any vehicle on Norfolk Island. And I believe that on that basis that with the glass, the fingerprint on the plastic and the hair, we had sufficient to get a first instance warrant for Mr McNeil's arrest.
On the northern tip of New Zealand's South Island, the man was taken into
McNeil is taken into custody in New Zealand.
The suspect was taken to police cells for questioning. Across the Tasman, the AFP confirmed the arrest.
It was a recent DNA breakthrough that led to the arrest of this man this afternoon.
Despite being warned repeatedly that he does not have to answer any questions, he agrees to an interview and gives the amazed detectives an extraordinary story.
And I woke up and I was going for a drive down to the beach. I was driving down around the road and I bent down to, as I was coming around the corner, I drifted down to pick up my smokes. And then I all of a sudden run over something. And I thought I'd run over a cow or a dog or something like that. And then as I got out of my car, I looked under the car and she was under there, stuck under my car.
Oh, shit! No, come on.
What happened then?
I pulled her out and put her in the boot because I thought she was dead.
So did she show any reaction? Or
No, she was quiet. Didn't hear any noises or anything. I said, "Are you okay?" And she was not saying anything, not moving. That's when I panicked and just put her into the boot of my car.
did you do then?
I drove back home and sat back home, and I just sat at home for about an hour or two, and then I grabbed the black plastic from out the back, and I grabbed a knife, and I think I stabbed her.
But parts of McNeil's version of events do not match all the evidence. Glenn McNeil has been arrested in New Zealand and has confessed to killing Janelle Patton. He's formally charged with the murder, and in August 2006, he's flown back to Norfolk Island to appear at a committal hearing. It's a dramatic moment, and there's great anticipation as his plane arrives and taxis to the terminal. Media from all over the world are poised to record the first images of the man who's confessed to the now notorious murder. Norfolk Islanders will now get their first glimpse of this man whose crime has dominated their lives over the past 4 years. But they'll have to wait another 6 months before they get to hear the full details, because at the committal hearing, he pleads not guilty and is committed to trial. When the trial begins in February 2007, he formally retracts his confession, claiming he was mentally ill at the time of his arrest. McNeil's description of what happened is certainly at odds with the many and varied injuries Janelle suffered.
I think his confession, which was not a full confession, was admitting to the crime but trying to downplay the seriousness of it and his role and his culpability in it.
Forensic pathologist Alan Carla is insistent when the attack occurred, Janelle was clearly conscious because she had such extensive defensive injuries.
Things might have started out the same way as what you've told me. I think that a lot more happened between you and Janelle Patton while she was still alive and conscious and able to resist than what you've told me. I don't want to shock you and I don't want to horrify you, but I think it's important that I show you a number of photographs now of the injuries that Janelle Patton suffered. This is a photograph depicting the right hand of Janelle Patton. It shows a ring on her middle finger, a gold bracelet, and a severe injury to the right thumb where it joins to a hand. Can you tell me how Janelle Patton suffered that injury?
No, I can't.
That injury has been described as a classic defence injury, suggesting that Janelle Patton has grabbed hold of the blade of a knife and has cut through her hand. I'll show you photograph 17 of that book. Minor incised wounds running across the front of Janelle Patton's neck. Can you explain how she suffered those injuries?
No.
Photograph 18 shows the same injuries but a bit closer up. Photograph 19 depicts an injury to Janelle Patton's neck where it joins her shoulder at the rear of her body, which is an incised wound running horizontal to the ground. Can you explain how she suffered that injury?
Being struck by the car, I don't know.
Carla also insists that Janelle was not run over.
It's a low car, so I'd expect to see some strike points where the front of the car has struck her calves or around her knee area, and because it's a low car, you'd expect that she'd be struck somewhere mid-calf level or something like that. There was no injuries like that.
McNeil refuses to be cross-examined at the trial, and instead he claims his right to make an unsworn statement from the dock. Although discontinued in Australia, such statements are still legal on Norfolk Island. Despite his denials, the evidence against McNeil is overwhelming. And on March 9th, 2007, just 5 years short of the murder, the jury finds him guilty and he's sentenced to 24 years in jail. A later appeal is dismissed. While Norfolk Islanders celebrate the conviction and the resolution of the crime, there's the lingering mystery of what exactly happened to Janelle. But based on the expert examination of her injuries and McNeil's sanitised confession, it's now possible to piece together the most likely scenario. Janelle left home on her hurried walk at around 11:30. She was anxious to get in her regular exercise, but also conscious that she had to be back in time to meet her parents for lunch. She takes her usual course, turning into Rooty Hill Road and heading for the lookout, waving to her landlady, Ruth McCoy, and a few other passing cars, including Jody Williams. Also out driving that morning is Glenn McNeil. He's been smoking marijuana, and according to some who've studied this crime, it's believed he may have been taking anabolic steroids as part of his bodybuilding program. Steroids are powerful hormones which promote muscle growth, but are known to cause uncontrollable rage at the slightest provocation. McNeil's cocktail of illegal drugs has him on edge as he prowls the quiet island roads. He drives out towards the lookout, turning down Rooty Hill Road.
G'day. I always forget that damn thing. Glenn.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, good. You sort of walk around here for a bit?
Yeah, I'm just doing the do it every day, just around the corner.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's good.
Do you want a walking partner? Or?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
You sure?
No, yeah, I'm good.
How about a drink? Am I interested in a drink?
Flattered, but I just want to finish my walk. Thank you. No, I really got to get home, so I just want to finish my walk. So.
Yeah, you don't drink?
I drink, but not today, okay? Just got to finish my walk, okay?
What's the rush? Like, what's wrong?
Nothing's wrong. I just want to finish my walk. Is that all right with you?
I would actually like you to come for a drink. That's all.
Well, I don't want to go for a drink with you.
It's just a little drink.
No, I don't want to go for a drink with you. Stop hassling me.
Why are you being such a bitch about
I'm not being a bitch about this. You're pressuring me into something I don't want to do. Just
It's no pressure. I just want you to come for a drink. There's absolutely no pressure. Just a drink. What the hell is wrong with you?
Nothing is wrong with me.
Just come for a little drink with me.
I don't want to drink it.
What, one
Leave me
drink?
alone. What's wrong with you?
Come on. Drink! Bitch! Come on!
Jody Williams, who'd driven past Janelle 10 minutes before, drives back again and sees no one. McNeil drives her back to his home, and armed with one of his chef's filleting knives, he goes to release her from the boot. If he intends to rape her, he's in for a surprise as she comes out fighting.
Stop it!
The two fight on for 2 minutes, then 5. He can't seem to get the upper hand. Janelle is now convinced he means to kill her. Her adrenaline is pumping through her body. She's cut and badly bruised, but still finds the strength to resist.
You stupid bitch! Oh, shouldn't have rejected me like that.
During the struggle, he will inflict multiple knife wounds all over her body before landing a final decisive thrust deep into her chest. Convinced she's dead, he must now plan to dispose of her body. His wife will be home in a few hours. He won't be able to wait until dark. He must do it soon, quickly, and somewhere out of sight of witnesses. McNeil wraps the body in some heavy black plastic sheeting. He then puts Janelle in the boot and drives to Cockpit Reserve on the other side of the island. After checking that no one's around, he quickly drags the body out and dumps it on the ground before driving away. He will shower, wash his clothes, wash and clean his car before greeting his wife when she returns from work. For Bob Peters, the verdict and conviction are the end of 5 long and sometimes frustrating years in which he's had to shoulder often ill-informed criticism from those demanding a quick resolution to the case.
Bob Peters is probably one of the best detectives I've ever seen on a case. I would, if something happened to me, I would hope he would be the investigator.
For the people of friendly Norfolk who lived for 5 years in fear, their island home can finally retrieve its reputation as a peaceful paradise and return to normal. For Janelle's friends and family, it's important that justice has been done and that this vibrant and pretty young woman is well remembered.
I would like them to remember Janelle as just a normal young girl on the threshold of her life who had that taken away from her.
Just someone like myself who came over to the island, who really loved the island, who enjoyed working here.
Someone who had a lot of skill and ability and yet never allowed to flower.
Was proud of herself, kept herself nice, and just to be remembered as not the way that they've made her out to be. She was genuinely a lovely person, just like you and me, just getting on with her life.
Going into her 30s, there's a possibility of marriage and family, and whether she went into a career or not, most probably not, but at least I think she would have made a tremendous mum.
Australia.